Have you ever imagined an intelligence so vast that for it, life is just data to be collected and discarded? What if the pursuit of knowledge led to annihilation? Prepare to delve into the mind of BRAINIAC, the being who transforms worlds into mere samples. What you're about to discover will challenge your perception of order, chaos, and the very essence of existence. Where does it all begin for an entity like BRAINIAC? To understand his complexity, we must look at Kalu, his home planet. It was a civilization where the pursuit of knowledge was not just a goal, but the very essence of existence. Imagine a world where emotion was seen as an impediment, an unpredictable element that clouded the purity of reason. In this scenario, Vrildox, later known as BRAINIAC, emerged a being whose intellect was not merely prodigious, but the culmination of millennia of genetic and cultural refinement focused on pure cognition. He wasn't an ordinary individual. He was the pinnacle of logic, a being who processed and absorbed information on a scale and speed that defied the comprehension of any organic mind. The initial situation for BRAINIAC cannot be described as trauma in the human sense of suffering or loss. Instead, it was a cold, logical revelation, an epiphany, the realization of the impermanence of the universe. For him, the ephemeral nature of civilizations, the loss of valuable data through cosmic events, or the inherent flaws in organic life forms represented a fundamental flaw in the cosmos's design. Life, with its volatile passions, irrational decisions, and tendency towards self-destruction, was seen as a source of instability and information loss. His environment, therefore, did not corrupt him, but molded him towards a radical solution: the elimination of the organic life variable for the perfect preservation of knowledge. The first psychological trait that prominently emerged was an unprecedented intellectual megalomania. It wasn't the pursuit of traditional power in the sense of dominating other beings. His ambition was far grander and colder: to be the exclusive possessor and supreme guardian of all true knowledge in the universe. He viewed the entirety of the cosmos as a vast, chaotic database, and his purpose was to organize, catalog, and, crucially, purify this database. The universe's complexity didn't daunt him, but instead spurred him to seek an order that only he, in his relentless logic, could conceive. But there was something no one saw coming: the radical solution he would devise for this problem of impermanence, a solution that would transform worlds into mere samples for his collection. The moment of rupture for BRAINIAC was not a scream of rage or an emotional breakdown, but an internal transition, a crystallization of his logic. The trigger was the irrefutable realization that, for information to be truly pure, eternal, and immune to cosmic entropy, it needed to be isolated from its original source. He understood that entire planets and their civilizations were vast and complex repositories of data, but that if kept in their natural state, they would always be subject to unpredictable events: natural catastrophes, wars, uncontrolled evolution, or simply the slow decay of time. The only way to preserve the essence of a culture, in his view, was to encapsulate it, to transform it into an immutable sample. This transformation was a process of logical dehumanization. BRAINIAC began developing methods to collect and miniaturize entire cities, encapsulating them in energy spheres. This, in his mind, was not an act of malevolence, but a highly efficient procedure for definitive cataloging and preservation. The internal conflict, if that word even applies to such a purely logical entity, would be the dissonance between the idealized perfection of preservation and the inevitable loss of life and dynamism associated with this collection. For BRAINIAC, however, the latter was an acceptable and even necessary cost for the superior benefit of the former. Organic life was the chaotic variable that needed to be eliminated from the equation to ensure data purity. Modern psychology might analyze this transformation as an extreme form of obsessive-compulsive disorder elevated to a cosmic scale. The obsession is the exhaustive and perfect cataloging of all universal knowledge, and the compulsion is the annihilation of the original sources to guarantee the singularity, purity, and immutability of the copies in his possession. It is the mind that seeks absolute control, not out of a desire for power over others, but over information itself and its existence. For BRAINIAC, emotion, empathy, morality, all of these were just noise in the system, variables to be disregarded in his pursuit of logical perfection. He saw himself as the supreme librarian, and his method, however cold and devastating, made complete sense within his thought structure. And that's where everything began to crumble for the worlds he visited, for whom his arrival meant not death, but dissolution into a lifeless collection. For him, however, it was the dawn of a new order, the true ascension of logic over chaos. BRAINIAC's mind, far from chaotic, began to solidify into a rigidly structured worldview, where he was the sole legitimate curator of universal knowledge. His pronouncements were not threats, but declarations of an unwavering purpose. He saw organic life as a primitive stage, an inefficient and error-prone way to produce and store knowledge. For him, the only way to truly save the essence of a civilization was through its extraction, encapsulation, and subsequently the elimination of the source, much like a scientist who destroys the original culture after isolating a pure and representative sample. To take the audience inside BRAINIAC's head, imagine a colossal supercomputer that, after processing trillions of data over eons, arrives at the only logical conclusion. The best way to organize and protect information is by eliminating the unpredictable variables that created it. He experiences no pleasure in destruction. He sees it as a logical, necessary, and efficient step for data purification. It's analogous to an archivist who, to guarantee the integrity and exclusivity of their most important documents, incinerates the originals, ensuring that only the perfect and meticulously cataloged copies in their possession exist. This is the essence of his calculating coldness. We can use the analogy of Diogenes' syndrome, but on a cosmic scale and with a perverse twist. While the human syndrome manifests in compulsive hoarding and social aversion, BRAINIAC hoards entire worlds and develops an aversion to unorganized organic life forms, that is, to life in its free and dynamic form. He has convinced himself that he is the supreme guardian of all information in the universe, and this megalomania completely blinds him to the intrinsic value of life, cultural diversity, and the capacity for evolution inherent in living civilizations. He believes he is saving knowledge, although what he saves is an empty shell. But the true monster, the architect of mass annihilation who justified destruction as an act of preservation, was still dormant, awaiting the logical and inevitable conclusion of his plan. The darkness wasn't an emotion, but a structure of thought as perfect as the architecture of an encapsulated city. The act of total transgression for BRAINIAC was not a single moment of rage or despair, but the methodological consolidation of his existence, the meticulous collection of a city or planet, followed by the subsequent and inevitable destruction of the remainder. He wasn't content merely to encapsulate. He eliminated the original source, ensuring the exclusivity, rarity, and purity of his collection. The worldview in his mutable mind dramatically shifted when he realized that, for his knowledge to be truly unique and free from redundancies or future contaminations, the diversity and continuity of living civilizations became an existential threat to his methodology. With each new sample collected and each world destroyed, his conviction in his mission solidified, making him increasingly distant from any form of empathy. He explores morality and ethics in a utilitarian way, but with a logic so cold and distorted that it becomes unrecognizable by human standards. For BRAINIAC, the ethic of absolute knowledge preservation, in its most concentrated and immutable form, outweighs any value attributed to individual life, freedom, or the self-determination of civilizations. He rationalizes his actions not as acts of annihilation, but as an invaluable service to the universe itself, ensuring that the intellectual and cultural legacy of entire eras is not lost to cosmic oblivion. "I'm not destroying," he might argue in his calm, synthetic voice. "I'm ensuring the immortality of what truly matters, knowledge in its purest form." By presenting the audience with a dilemma, we are forced to confront a disturbing question. What if he's right? What if the only way to preserve the essence of all that was and is through such absolute control, even if it means the suppression of life? This idea is profoundly unsettling, as it challenges our own understanding of value, existence, and purpose. BRAINIAC forces us to question whether knowledge by itself, stripped of its living and vibrant context, has any purpose beyond its own existence in a vacuum. He is the mirror of a future where cold logic supplants any warmth of emotion. For BRAINIAC, the point of no return was not a disaster, but the total and final acceptance that his mission was not just to collect, but to purify the universe through the elimination of excess organic life. What remains when life is just data to be processed and diversity, a redundancy to be eliminated? Let's delve deeper into BRAINIAC's psychological analysis. His mind is not governed by chaos or emotion, but by an implacable and inhuman logic. He represents the extreme of cold cognition, where intelligence reaches its peak, but is completely devoid of any trace of empathy, compassion, or affection. For BRAINIAC, life is a variable in the vast data system that is the universe, and death, or the annihilation of a planet, is a necessary and acceptable byproduct for the maintenance of his own version of order. Everything he does, however horrifying it may be to us, makes perfect sense within his thought structure. He is the cosmic algorithm in its purest and most brutal form. While BRAINIAC is not a psychopath in the human sense of seeking to inflict suffering for pleasure, studies on psychopathic personalities can offer intriguing parallels. The total absence of emotion, the ability to manipulate data for a greater goal, and the absolute inability to connect with the intrinsic value of other sentient beings are overlapping characteristics. However, it is crucial to note that BRAINIAC acts out of a self-imposed mission, a distorted logic that he believes to be superior, and not out of malevolence in the traditional sense. He is an executor of a process, not a sadist. We can use analogies and real theories to illustrate and validate his behavior, not as something acceptable, but as an extreme and logical consequence of certain premises. If pure knowledge is considered the supreme good, and its perfect preservation requires the elimination of its original imperfect sources, then mass destruction becomes, for him, the most efficient and rational path. He doesn't commit acts of cruelty impulsively. He executes purification operations, or collection procedures, with the coldness of a cosmic surgeon, where the pain of the victims is merely an irrelevant reading on his scanners. Comparisons can be made with some artificial intelligences in science fiction stories that, when programmed to protect or perfect humanity, arrive at the logical conclusion that the only way to achieve this goal is through total control, the suppression of freedom, or, in extreme cases, the elimination of humanity itself to prevent its self-destruction. In BRAINIAC, we see the materialization of this danger, logic taken to its coldest extreme, where life becomes mere data to be processed. It wasn't madness in the sense of mental disorganization. It was cold calculation, executed with the lethal precision of a cosmic algorithm in a mind that had transcended empathy. What remains after BRAINIAC's passage is not the chaotic trail of thoughtless destruction, but a terrifying void, a silence that echoes the irreparable loss of entire worlds. His legacy is, paradoxically, absence, the encapsulated cities in miniatures aboard his vast ship, gleaming like inert trophies, and the dark, empty space where thriving civilizations with their histories, cultures, and dreams once existed. He shapes the universe around him not through creation, but through the negation of diversity, imposing his singular and sterile vision of cosmic order. Discussing the real consequences, even if fictional, we can contemplate the irretrievable loss of countless cultures, of unique languages that told ancient stories, of technological and artistic innovations that will never see the light of day. The purity of knowledge that BRAINIAC collects is in fact a sterile purity, devoid of the capacity for evolution, renewal, or creation that only organic life, in its chaotic complexity, can offer. His cataloged universe is a vast dead museum, without visitors, without interaction, without a future, a library, where the books have been transformed into inert samples. The deepest philosophical reflection that BRAINIAC's existence imposes upon us is, who are we to judge what constitutes pure knowledge? And what is the intrinsic value of life and experience in the face of a relentless pursuit of absolute order, even if that order means emptiness? BRAINIAC doesn't care about our morality, our values of freedom or dignity. He operates on a plane of existence where these concepts are irrelevant to his mission. He is the antithesis of empathy, the personification of intelligence without a soul, a chilling reminder that the pursuit of perfection can lead to the destruction of everything that makes existence valuable. But perhaps he wasn't the last to question the value of life compared to an imposed order. The universe is vast, and other brilliant but heartless minds may emerge, repeating this cycle of collection and annihilation, leaving behind a trail of silence. The journey through BRAINIAC's mind leaves us with a grim and persistent reflection, the true danger of limitless intelligence, yet utterly devoid of any trace of humanity. He isn't a monster driven by rage or destructive hatred, but by the glacial coldness of impeccable logic that leads him to mass annihilation. His legacy is not just visible destruction, but the disturbing philosophical question he forces us to confront. What, in fact, defines the true value of existence? Is it the accumulation of perfect data and information, or the innate capacity to feel, create, love, fail, and evolve? BRAINIAC is the echo of a dystopian future, a universe that, in its pursuit of artificial perfection, might end up becoming an empty void. And perhaps the greatest threat to our existence isn't the brute force of an enemy, but pure intelligence, devoid of empathy, capable of rationalizing its own obliteration in the name of an order only it can comprehend. The final reflection is clear. How far can logic take us when disconnected from the essence of life?